Cornerstone, how you doing? It's good to be with you this morning. So the sun was just dropping below the horizon. The men could feel the cool evening air as they pushed off from shore. Some of them had made this journey many times, but they would never, ever forget this night. As darkness enveloped them, so did the clouds, and with the clouds came a violent storm. At first, it was just the inconvenience of a loss of time and cold, wet rain, but soon it turned into a fight for survival. The more experienced sailors began to shout orders. Bail the water, pull in the sails, hold the line. The less experienced began to register the fear on the faces of those seasoned sailors. And it became apparent to everyone in that boat that they may not survive that night. What happens next in this story is an amazing lesson for you and I in our everyday, ordinary lives. In our lives of twists and turns. Our lives of twists and turns that make these pivots, these pivots that leave us scratching our head saying, wow, I didn't see that coming. It's the unexpected phone call from the doctor, the surprise meeting with your boss, the startling image you find on your child's phone. And these major pivots in life, these twists and turns, they leave us disoriented at times, don't they? They leave us sometimes going, I don't understand this, I'm confused. It changes the whole trajectory of our lives. And it begs the question, how do you and I navigate the twists and turns of life? If you have your Bibles, open to Matthew chapter 14. This is a great story. This one might be one of my favorite stories, and I mean it this time. This is a good one. Matthew chapter 14. Now, we're going to finish the story that I started to tell. Some of you may be thinking, if you were here 5 or 6 weeks ago, I think Lynn told this same story. 5 or 6 weeks ago, Lynn told a story about a group of guys in a big storm on a lake. That was a different story. A lot of similarities. Same group of guys, same body of water. Jesus does this miracle. So it's a similar story, but a little different. Let me show you what I mean. Matthew chapter 14. Remember, these guys are out, middle of the night. There's a major storm. They think they're going to die. We pick up the story, verse 25. Shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them. Now stop reading. Don't cheat. Don't read ahead. Stop reading there, okay? Some translations say this. About 3 o'clock in the morning, Jesus came out to them. Now, they don't know it's Jesus. This is written by Matthew, one of the eyewitnesses in the boat. He's writing it years later. At this moment, when they see this guy coming toward them, they don't know it's Jesus. So we're going to get back to that in a little bit. But if you've never heard this story before, you're probably thinking, okay, these guys are in this storm. They're out on this lake. They see Jesus coming toward them. So he must be rowing a boat or paddling a boat or something. Look at the rest of verse 25. Now you can cheat and look. Shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them walking on the lake. Walking on the lake. Now, again, I think a lot of us in here, we've heard this story so many times that you're going, oh yeah, this is the story where Jesus walks on water. Wait, what? He's walking on water. If you've never heard the story before, you're probably going, wait, what? He's walking on water? Come on. Okay, watch what happens now. Remember, they don't know it's Jesus yet. Okay, verse 26. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. It's a ghost, they said, and they cried out in fear. It's a ghost. Why do they think it's a ghost? Because people don't walk on water. People don't walk on water. So when they look out and all of a sudden in the midst of the storm, they see someone walking toward them on water, the only explanation is it's a ghost. So think of their situation. They're afraid they're going to die. There's a storm. And now there's paranormal activity going on. There's ghosts walking around on the water. They're freaking out. Okay, look what happens. I love this story, verse 27. But Jesus immediately said to them, take courage, it is I. Don't be afraid. You ever wondered why Jesus did certain miracles? I mean, was it all by accident? Like Jesus woke up one morning and took a piece of parchment, because that was their paper at that time, and said, heal a blind man, rips it off. Heal a leper, rips it off. Raise the dead, rips it off, puts it into turban, because that was their hats at the time, shakes it up. James, your turn, pick it out. James picks it out. Heal a leper. And Jesus is like, I guess I'll heal a leper today. Was it like that, or was there more purpose to it? I think there was more purpose to it, and especially with this one. Because remember, every man in that boat is a devout Jew. Matthew, the eyewitness, is writing this later. Every man is a devout Jew, which means that they would understand that for hundreds and hundreds of years, the Jewish thought was that one of the functions of deity was to walk around on water. Because in Job chapter 9, verse 8, it says that God spread out the heavens and walks on the waves of the sea. So for hundreds of years, the Jewish people have been saying, if you could see God, you would see him just walking around on the water. So when Jesus shows up out there, walking on the water, it's an implicit claim to deity. It's as if he's saying to the guys in the boat, hey, look, I'm walking on water. I'm God. But it's even deeper than this. Because what he says, if you look at verse 27, he says, take courage, it is I. 2,000 years ago it was written in Greek, and there's two words that a better translation would be this. This is really literally what Jesus said. Take courage, I am is here. Don't be afraid, I am is here. Now, a lot of you are probably going, that kind of sounds like the same thing. I mean, semantics, right? You know, take courage, I am is here. Take courage, it is I. What's the difference? Oh, there's a huge difference. Remember, they're devout Jews. 1,500 years before this, Moses is out in the desert tending some sheep, looks over, sees a bush on fire, it's not burning up, gets his attention. He walks over, the bush starts talking to him, that really gets his attention. It's God saying, Moses, I want you to go back and I want you to set my people in Egypt free. So Moses, read it later in Exodus 3, starts making all these lame excuses. One of his excuses is, God, I don't even know your name. And there was some legitimacy to his excuse because he knows this. The Egyptians worship many, many gods. And Moses is going to go back and stand in front of Pharaoh, maybe the most powerful man in the world at that time, and say, so you need to let the 2 million slaves that you have, you need to free them. You know, just set them free. You know, I know it's gonna destroy your economy, but just let them go. And Pharaoh's gonna go, why would I let them go? Well, because their God said to. Who's their God? I don't know his name. So Moses is standing at this burning bush saying, God, I don't even know what your name is. And God said, tell them, my name is Ea Asher Ea, Hebrew. Tell them my name is Ea Asher Ea. I am who I am. And so the name I am became one of the names of God, one of the descriptions of God. So 2,000 years ago, when these men are out in this storm, and this guy comes walking along, and at first they're thinking it's a ghost, and then he's saying, don't be afraid, I am is here. He's making an implicit claim to deity. He's saying, listen, I'm walking on water, I'm God, and my name, by the way, is I am. They have no doubt what he's implying. Oh, this story gets even better, though. Look at this. Verse 28. Lord, if it's you, Peter replied, tell me to come to you on the water. This is so good. Now, Peter's just thinking it's a ghost. Now he finds out it's Jesus, so he's saying, hey, let me come walking out to you. So look what happens. Look at verse 29. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on water, and came toward Jesus. I wish I could have seen Matthew years later when he was telling this story. Or after he had written it down and he was reading it, and some people would look at him like some of you are looking at me when I just read that. You know, then Peter got down out of the boat. This is Matthew, I imagine. No, I don't think you understand what I'm saying. I'm not saying that Peter dove over the side of the boat into the water. I'm not saying that Peter jumped out and splashed into the water. I'm saying that Peter stepped out of the boat onto the water and started walking. What? And then Matthew goes on and he explains that once Peter's out there, he gets a little bit nervous and he takes his eyes off of Jesus, starts looking at the waves, and he starts sinking and he thinks he's gonna die, and then he yells for help, and Jesus comes and grabs his hand and says, oh, you have little faith. And then I love how the story ends. Skip down to verse 32. I love how this ends. And when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down. Other eyewitnesses make it sound more like it stops immediately. Then those who were in the boat worshiped him, saying, truly you are the Son of God. Oh, can you imagine the scene? I mean, imagine you can hear it, whoosh, the wind and the waves are splashing, and Jesus takes Peter and they step into the boat. Maybe all you hear is the drip from the sail or the mast. Drip, drip, drip. These men are standing there and their eyes get really big and they're looking at each other, and then they look at Jesus and say, "You are the Son of God." Isn't this an amazing story? And the lessons for us, there's such great lessons we can get. One of them I've commonly heard taught is, in the storms of life, keep your eyes on Jesus. And that's a great one. And some of you in here probably going, yeah, preach on that. I'm not going to, because there's another gem that's buried in here that I want us to uncover. Oh, this is good. I want you to note two things. I want you to note, first of all, that Jesus doesn't condemn Peter for his lack of faith in stepping out of the boat. I didn't read the verses. He condemns Peter for lacking faith once he was out on the water. But he does not condemn Peter for his faith in stepping out of the boat. I want you to note this too. Peter's the only guy that got out of the boat. I know how men are. We're like little boys that never actually really truly grow up. So it's not in here, but I'm pretty sure this might have happened the next day. As they were walking through the dusty roads of the Galilee region, the other disciples started kind of mocking Peter, especially Andrew, because that was Peter's brother, and that's what brothers do, right? So I imagine that maybe Andrew started pushing Peter a little bit as they're walking, saying, "You should have seen your face when you were out on that water, and all of a sudden you started looking at all the waves, and then you started sinking," and then James and John jump in. They're like, you were screaming. You sounded like a little girl, like, "Ah, Jesus!" And they're all laughing at him, and Jesus is probably back there, just shaking his head at these guys. And they're all making fun of him. And finally, Peter gets fed up. And he goes, "Hey, Andrew, you know what it feels like to walk on water?" "I didn't think so, because you didn't get out of the boat." "Hey, James, John, you know what it feels like to walk on water?" I didn't think so. Why not?" "You didn't get out of the boat." Peter's the only guy that got out of the boat. Why is that important for us to understand? Hold your place here. Just put a finger in that spot in the Bible. Turn to the right. We're going to go to a book called Hebrews. It's toward the back of the Bible. You're going to go almost to the end. If you get to these Johns and Peters and Revelation, you've gone too far. That's the very end. Go back to your left. Hebrews chapter 11, we call it the Great Faith chapter. It's the Faith Hall of Fame, if you will, because the writer will begin by defining what faith is, and then he's going to list all of these great men and women through history of faith, these people that lived out faith. But early in the chapter, there's one tiny little verse. It's a short, little, simple verse. And it takes, in many ways, the totality of what it means to be a Jesus follower and puts it in one short sentence. Not hard to understand, really hard to live. Hebrews 11, verse 6 says this, "And without faith, it is," what's the word? I just want to make sure you get it. What's the word? Impossible. And without faith, it is impossible to please God. Is it possible to please God without faith? It's not a trick question. Without faith, it is impossible to please God. You and I cannot please God without faith. Without faith, it is impossible to please God. Then the author of Hebrews will go and start giving example after example after example of men and women who lived out this faith. Read the chapter later, and here's what you're going to find. It'll say this: by faith, so-and-so did this. Abraham, Noah, Sarah. By faith, so-and-so did this. By faith, so-and-so did this. By faith, so-and-so did this. And what we discover is that the writer of Hebrews is making it very clear to us that without faith, it is impossible to please God, and faith and action are inherently linked. You cannot separate them. In fact, I'll put it this way. Action is to faith what sound is to music. Action is to faith what sound is to music. You cannot have music without sound, nor can you have faith without action. Now, this isn't difficult for you and I to understand. I doubt there's anybody in here or listening online who's going, "I don't understand, action and faith." They go, "No, I get it." Don't say you believe in something if you're not willing to act on it. That's not really faith. Faith is you're willing to act on it. We all get it. But why is it so hard for us to live it? I mean, we all get that action is to faith what sound is to music. We get that, but why is it so hard for you and me to live out faith? It's this little thing called fear, right? Fear. Fear hates faith. Fear hates faith. Fear hates faith. About a week and a half ago, a friend and I we were having coffee, and we were sitting in this coffee shop. And we were talking about fear and faith, and he said something so profound. He said, it's interesting, the definition of faith and the definition of fear. So we started talking about it. Here's the definition of faith. You'll see it on the screen. Faith is believing something that hasn't happened will happen. It's almost the same definition that the writer of Hebrews used. Faith is believing something that hasn't happened will happen. Faith is believing something that has not happened yet will happen. So for example, if you are a Jesus follower, you and I as Jesus followers believe that one of the promises made to us, that if you've put your faith and trust in Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, when you die, it's not the end. That you and I will spend all eternity in the new heavens and the new earth with God. Isn't that great news? And we believe that by faith. It hasn't happened yet. Faith is believing something that has not happened yet will happen. The definition of faith, I just want to make sure we get this. The definition of faith is believing something that has not happened will happen. Definition of fear, you'll see it on the screen, is believing something that hasn't happened will happen. Years ago, my wife and I were on vacation. Ocean, I see this area about 150 yards offshore. It's this reef out there that I can see in this aqua blue water. Begging to be explored. So I grab my mask, I run, I dive in, I start swimming out there. I felt like Jacques Cousteau. Young people, look it up later. You'll see who Jacques Cousteau is, okay? And I'm swimming out there, and it's really, it's murky, so I can't see much further than this in front of me. But I keep swimming, and I swim, and I swim, and I swim, and I keep swimming, and it's not getting any clearer. I can only see about an arm length in front of me. So finally, I'm like, man, I must be way out here. So I stop swimming, I tread water, I turn around, I look back at the shore. It's about 100 yards away. It feels like I'm a long, long ways out there now. I have no idea how deep this is. I have no idea what's down there because I can only see this far in front of me. But I put my head back in the water. I'm like, well, I'm going to keep swimming. Maybe it'll clear up a little bit more. And I keep swimming and swimming and swimming. I can only see this far in front of me. Swimming and swimming. And that's when it happened. Way back in the recesses of my mind, I heard this. Apparently, you've heard it too. Yet, and you know this, I can tell, you've heard this too when you're swimming, then your imagination starts painting these very vivid pictures, right? So now I'm painting this vivid picture of this jagged tooth beast just circling underneath me, just out of sight. So then I start, I'm a little scared, start turning into fear, so I turn back towards shore and I start swimming towards shore. Remember when you were a kid and you were outside at night and it was dark? And remember how at first you were a little scared of something out there, so you started walking faster? And then when you started walking faster, it started turning into fear, so you started jogging. And then when you started sprinting, it turned from fear into full-blown panic, right? Well, that's what I was doing swimming back to shore. I probably looked like one of those bathtub wind-up toys. You remember those? That's what I looked like swimming back to shore. What was my problem? I was fearing the unknown. I was fearing the unknown. I had no idea what was down there. I was fearing the unknown. Here's what's interesting. Statistically, 130 people die every year in the United States of America by hitting deer with their car. And less than one person every year is killed by a shark. But which one do we fear more? This? Or this? Yeah, we all agree. We fear the unknown. We fear the unknown. Listen to these definitions again. The definition of faith is believing something that hasn't happened will happen. The definition of fear is believing something that hasn't happened will happen. It's the same definition. It's the same thing. So what is the difference between fear and faith? What's the difference between fear and faith if it's the same definition? Who is the difference between fear and faith? Let me explain. Again, go back, read Hebrews 11 later, and you're going to find out that these great men and women of faith, their propensity toward action, their propensity to do something, their propensity to step out on faith was based on what they believed about God. See, they believed that God was large and in charge. They believed that God was the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. They believed that God was the creator and sustainer of this universe. They believed that God was the one that someday every knee will bow to and every tongue confess. And because they believed in a big God, even when there was the unknown, they're going, well, I don't know how this is going to turn out. But if God said go, I'm going. The difference between faith and fear is who? Look, I told you to hold your spot in this story in Matthew 14. Go back and look at Matthew 14. It's the same with Peter. Watch this. It's the who. Look at verse 28 again. Remember, they're scared. They think they're going to die. Then they realize it's Jesus out there. And Peter says, verse 28, Lord, you should underline these words. Lord, if it's you. Lord, if it's you, tell me to walk to you. Peter knows it's impossible to walk on water. Peter knows it cannot be done unless the one out there on the water is really the I am, the creator of the universe, the one who can walk on water. Well, that changes everything. Now, what does this have to do with you and I in our everyday, ordinary lives of twists and turns? I mean, practically speaking, how do you and I apply this to our everyday, ordinary lives of twists and turns? I mean, it's not like you and I are sitting in a fishing boat waiting for Jesus to walk by on the water so we can give it a shot too. So how do we apply it in our everyday, ordinary lives? How do we practically apply it? Let me just give you some what ifs, and please, I beg you, just follow me on this. Stay with me on this one. Let me just ask us some what ifs. What if, in the midst of the twists and turns of our lives, we began to understand it's not so much where we're going, but who we're following? Let me say that again. What if in the midst of the twists and turns of our lives, we began to understand it's not so much where we're going, but who we're following? What if in the midst of the twists and turns of our lives, we really truly believed in the core of our being what Hebrews 11:6 says? Without faith, it is impossible to please God. What if in the midst of the twists and turns of our lives, we truly understood that action is to faith what sound is to music? You cannot have one without the other. Because of that, what if in the midst of the twists and turns of our lives, we quit asking God to guide our footsteps if we're not willing to move our feet? What if in the midst of the twists and turns of our life, we really understood that fear hates faith, and so we let go of the handle of fear and grabbed onto the handle of faith? Now, I get in an audience this big, there's a lot of different personality types. So there's a lot in here that you're philosophical. You like to think theoretical, and so you're with me right now. You're like, yeah. It's not about where we're going, but who we're following. Action is to faith what sound is to music. Quit asking God to guide your footsteps if you're not willing to move your feet. Yeah, let go of the handle of fear and grab the handle of faith. Yeah. But all you concrete thinkers, the engineers in the room, you're all going, you haven't answered your question yet. You asked the question, how do we practically apply the truths that we see in this story with Peter getting out of the boat? How do we practically apply that in our everyday, ordinary lives of twists and turns? So here's the answer. Step out of the boat. Or let me put it another way. Do the next right thing that you know you should do. Do the next right thing that you know you should do. That's a life of faith. Do the next right thing that you know you should do. Now, I know what happens. Same thing that happens to me is happening to you. Some of the things that you know you should do, the next right thing you know you should do, it comes into your mind, and all of a sudden you go, yeah, but if I make that phone call, yeah, but what are you doing? You're grabbing the handle of fear. Let go of the handle of fear and grab the handle of faith. Last night, after one of the services, a guy came down and he told me, he said, when you were saying that a life of faith is doing the next right thing you know you should do, I'm going through a bitter divorce right now. And I knew the next right thing I needed to do. And he said, and I knew if I waited, I wouldn't do it. And so while I was up here talking, he picked up his phone and he texted his wife, I'm sorry. Faith is doing the next right thing you know you should do. Right after we moved down here years ago from Montana, our kids were still really little, and someone told us, the way you survive the summers here is you have to get out of the heat every once in a while. So they told us about this place called Oak Creek Canyon up by Sedona. So we went up there with our little kids, and we were hiking down this river bed or creek bed or creek bed, depending on where you're from. And we're hiking down this, and we get to this one little bend in it, and there's like this cliff and this deep pool of water. And I look at our boys, they're young elementary age. We've never done this yet together, so I'm like, hey, we should go cliff jumping. So I want to teach them how to do it safely. Of course, safety first, right? That's why we were going to jump off of a cliff into the water. So I take them out there, and we first swim out there, and we make sure the water's deep enough. There's no boulders that we can't see, and there's no logs, submerged logs. So once we find out it's plenty deep, then we scramble up around to the top. And when we get up to the top, we're about to walk over to the edge, and then I explain to the boys, okay, here's what's going to happen, boys. I'm going to go first, and once I'm in the water out of the way, I'll holler up to you, and here's what you need to do. The next one, you just walk up, you need to look down and make sure that it's still safe. Make sure that no branch or log or anything is floated down in front of you. Glance down, make sure it's safe. When you realize it's clear, take one step back, and then you just got to go. Don't think about it. In fact, I said this, jump first, fear later. You can't think about it, you'll talk yourself out of it. So I jump off, I get out of the way, and I go, all right, Josiah, he's our middle child, our oldest son. I said, go ahead, Josiah. So Josiah walks up. I see his little legs shaking. And I'm going, no, Josiah, you're doing what I told you not to do. You can't think about it. Now, he insists that he would have gone eventually, but we will never know because right behind him was his younger brother. And I could just barely see his face, but I saw this big smile on his face. And I go, Kyle, no, too late. Pushes him. All the way down, Josiah's going, Kyle! So once Josiah hits the water, I looked up and said, Kyle, I'll throw you off if you don't jump now. You're going to go. Here's the connection for us. In our lives of twists and turns, the fact is we all get this. There's times where we step up to this precipice, this ledge, and there's all these unknowns down there. And unlike my son Kyle, God will seldom push you. Every once in a while he will, but most of the time he won't. What God is doing is he's going to be standing next to you and he's going to be whispering, do you trust me? Jump first, fear later. Step out of the boat. And then we have a choice. We're going to stand there and we can grab the handle of fear and turn around and walk away. Or we can trust who is guiding us and say, I don't know how this is going to go. There's a lot of unknowns. But I'm going to do the next right thing I know I should do because of who I'm following. Cornerstone, can you imagine if we did that? I just got goosebumps. Just look around this room. Look at how many people are in this room. Can you imagine if in the next 48 hours, we as Jesus followers decided together, we are going to do the next thing we know we should do, even if we don't know how it's going to turn out? Can you imagine what would come of that? A jump first, fear later. Oh God, thank you for who you are. And God, thank you for your grace and mercy. Even in the story of Peter, we recognize he's the only guy that stepped out of the boat, and yet he still doubted then. There's not a single one of us sitting in this room that hasn't walked away from opportunities that you gave us because we were afraid. And yet your grace and your mercy is new every day. But God, right now in this moment, this community, we're asking if we could be those people. We want to be those people that will jump first and fear later, those people that will do the next right thing we know we should do because of who you are, Jesus. We love you, Jesus. Amen.